It's about that time.
City Views.
What's happening in your city?
City Views. City Views. City Views.
We can't laugh.
Oh, yeah. Let's be
No
stern.
laughing.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to City Views for our special segment, What's Cookin', with 65th District State Rep Michelle Cook. Good afternoon, Michelle.
Good afternoon, Jacques.
How are you?
I'm doing okay, thank you. How are you today?
You know, we're going to have to stop meeting like this.
I know. It is definitely how rumors get started.
Well, a lot has happened since our last conversation, Michelle.
Yes, it seems as if you wait a few minutes and even more and more changes by the minute. And so you are 100% correct.
And I do want to thank you for allowing us the opportunity to have a few words with the governor last week. Thank you very much for that.
No, I'm happy that we could arrange that. I think it worked out really, really well.
It did, and it's very obvious to me that the governor has a lot on his plate, but working tirelessly to make sure that the public safety of the residents of Connecticut are taken care of.
You know, I think that should be evident to everybody as we see him every day, bringing us, as much transparent and honest and open information as possible. And that's been going on since day one, given the pandemic that we are sitting at. And I know that it doesn't always make everybody happy with the information that they're giving. I know that we're not pleasing all of the people all of the time. But I would offer you this. We've gone into a phased-in approach with opening the state of Connecticut, and thus far, we've been very fortunate to not see an increase in hospitalizations. We've been seeing an increase in cases, but we knew, as we've discussed this several times, in the past weeks, that the more you test, the more you're going to see positive cases. That the way to ensure that we're fighting and beating this virus is by keeping people out of the hospitals and off of the ventilators. And I think that we've been very fortunate here in the state of Connecticut to not see what we have seen in some of those other states that have now become hotbedded states. And I think Florida really sticks out in my mind when they had over 4,000 cases after Memorial Day weekend, and they literally opened their floodgates with no simple rollout plan and just said, okay, we're going to go back to, life as normal. And as we've recognized that life it's not the same yet. And hoping that people here are, as I've said and requested, patient, kind, and respectful, because at the end of the day, it is truly about getting back to some sense of normalcy, getting our kids back to school, and getting our folks back to work. But if we decide to just run off the cuff and do whatever we want, that could put us backwards as opposed to forward. And we know that our families need this. We need to get back to work. We need to get our kids back to school, but we must have a healthy community.
Now, some people are questioning whether we should have locked down in the first place. What's your assessment of those sentiments?
I think it's timely that you're asking me that, given the situation that I've been in all day today. So I went to Hartford today to be a part of a press conference with the Women's Caucus and the governor and our majority leader. And that was about nursing homes and about just the horrific things that we've seen in our nursing homes. And, we locked down our nursing homes to protect them, but we did not put restrictions on their staff. And so the sad reality is, as much as the staff were doing their job, they were not given the necessary equipment by the facilities of which they worked in to protect them and their families, as well as protecting the patients that they were caring for. And so, my story today was about my father-in-law and about all of the other, over 2,000 folks that have lost their lives in our nursing homes, and recognizing that the governor has called for an investigation, a statewide investigation, and I'm grateful for that. I had sent him a letter April 22nd asking for just that, and realizing that, God forbid, we see a return of this pandemic, that we are better prepared and we ensure that the most vulnerable in our communities, our nursing homes, our assisted living centers, our group homes, they are better prepared. And we owe it to all of those folks that have entrusted us to take care of them and fight for them.
Well, Congress is going to be asking some of the governors to come to Capitol Hill to testify about their procedures in that situation. What recommendations would you suggest to our governors in retrospect in how they handled sending the COVID patients to the nursing homes?
So I think that we need to be cautious about stating that. Actually, my husband and I were just having that conversation. So I think there's a multi-layer of things here that happened. Number one, I don't believe that actions were taken in the nursing homes soon enough. But at the same time, I also think that we could have bettered that by ensuring, as I just stated, that our staff was given the necessary PPE to protect both themselves and those folks that they were taking care of. So that would be one of the first recommendations that I really would look hard at and say, are you stocked appropriately for 6 months of PPE to give you the opportunity to do what you need to do, but then resupply if necessary? We recognize that there was an issue and a lag in testing. God forbid we see this again in the fall. And we were at Charlotte Hungerford Hospital last week after you had spoken with the governor. There's the conversation that this might reap its, evil head more than once or twice in a year before we get a vaccination for this. So, I think that we really need to look at all of those things. We need to look at testing. We need to look at infectious disease protocol. We need to look at the isolation component. We need to look at the time of intakes. We need to look at the amount of folks that were able to leave to go to the doctor and when that took place. We also have the issue that when you have dedicated family members like, my husband and us in this house and other members of our community that were in their nursing homes, visiting their family members, not once or twice, but sometimes 3 or 4 times a day. They were the primary caregiver. Those loved ones were going into the nursing homes. They were that primary caregiver. And when you couldn't be there, that's when the staff from the nursing home stepped in. Once the doors were shut and a family member couldn't get in, now that changed the dynamic of care. And that makes a huge difference in a loved one's mentality, social emotional health, which makes physical health even better. And when you are shut off from your loved one, that is a game changer. And, we already know that there is a stress put on our nurses and our CNA staff when we talk about the pressures of nursing homes and the amount of staff that are there and the amount of money that they're getting paid. So that's pre-COVID pandemic. That's been something that, I've been working on for years. So I think that this just really shined a light on what we've been fighting for all along. So how do we turn around and change all of that? And a lot of those technicalities are legislative. Increasing the requirements, because the federal requirements are lower than ours in theory. So increase the requirements of hourly care, maybe change the dynamic of the way that we staff nursing homes. I liken it to, early childhood, that if we require, one adult for every 5 or 6 infants and 1 adult for every 8 to 10 toddlers, maybe we really need to look at that type of a staffing ratio with folks in nursing homes, because their needs could be very similar when we talk about care. And so, this is really an overall holistic look at the system and what we can do in the 10 weeks that we're going to have for this group to give an analysis. I know that there's been some concern about why we're not using our state auditors. Our state auditors they're not an expertise in this field. We solicited our state auditors some years ago to audit special education programs in the state of Connecticut, but it took them quite some time to become abreast in the special education rules, laws, and otherwise before they could even audit the programs. We don't have time here. We need an expert from the outside to truly come in and say, this is what we see. And this is not only with our facilities, this is also with our department. Did we as a Department of Public Health do all of the right things? Did we as a Department of Social Services do all of the right things? This does not get us off the hook either. This is really trying to hold folks accountable and to figure out what we need to do and what was done wrong and how can we assure it doesn't happen again.
Now, tell me if I'm interpreting this correctly, but if they did move those COVID patients to the nursing homes, they would have had to create more beds and more spaces for them in the hospital. Is that correct?
Well, we made COVID-only facilities in the state of Connecticut. We had one right here in Torrington on Wyoming Avenue, which was a facility that had been closed. They made a variety of different COVID-only facilities across the state. The problem that we have is not everybody knew that they were COVID positive when they were being moved from a hospital to a nursing home. And, the real question is, when did COVID enter our society? So, did it enter the state of Connecticut in February or March, or did it enter in January or December?
Right.
And was it really an underlining issue? So, before, without knowing the exact entry date onto when that happened, we recognized that it became a huge problem back in March. But there was problems in New York prior to it being a problem here. But we know that we share the same train lines. We share the same borders. And it only makes sense that our infection rolled from one state to the other. But by not understanding the virus early on in its stages, really made so many uncertainties. And as we were at the hospital, like I said last week, talking to the ICU doctor and a variety of folks that are up there doing yeoman's work, I can't thank them enough. They even said, this is a moving target. We are learning as we go along. That there was the understanding that we needed to put folks on ventilators. Maybe not everybody now needs to be put on a ventilator, but then that was the guidance. Then we did not necessarily have some type of a medication that could possibly lessen the effects of COVID. Now, a few months later, we learned that maybe there are a few things that have the ability to work, lessen the symptoms, or possibly fight this. Nothing is going to work for everybody. We also have learned that by country, this virus is different. So the way that we might react to the virus in the United States is going to be totally different that is going to be reacted into the UK or Asia or Germany or Italy. So every nationality, every country is seeing just a tad bit of a different strand of this virus. Not to mention the already in place strands of the L and the S, and the one is worse and one is better or less, So with all of that aside, you need to ensure that your hospitals, which was the huge problem, we wanted to ensure that our hospitals were not overloaded, and that was the huge issue. We also had pop-up hospitals for COVID patients. We were going to use East School here in Torrington. The equipment and the beds were there. By the grace of God, we didn't have to do that.
It's always better to be safe than sorry, I would imagine.
I think that there's no other way to handle a situation like this, especially with so many unknowns. This could have gone so much worse.
Right.
It's bad. And please don't get me wrong. This is bad. This has been bad. We have lost thousands upon thousands of lives in the state of Connecticut and hundreds of thousands of lives across the United States, and then many more worldwide. I am not lessening the impact or the severity of this. I am saying that I think that we are blessed to not have seen it as bad as it could have been, which goes back to the question you asked me last week about what kind of rating I would give the state when we talk about the reactions and our directions with the pandemic response.
As we all are very aware that this pandemic has wreaked havoc on lives in several different ways. And one of those other ways has been the effect on small business employees. And I read something that was kind of disturbing in terms of um, the lack of oversight for some of the tranches of stimulus that was administered by Congress. Is there any way that the state of Connecticut can claw back some of those revenues so that the small businesses that are still haven't received any type of relief or compensation can see some of that?
So that becomes really a difference between the federal and the state government, right? So, we recognize that that first round of PPP that was offered up very early on by the federal government really did not have a lot of direct oversight or direction or guidelines. That it was directed for a small business, but then the question was, if I own a chain, but I own multiple small businesses within that chain, do I qualify for this? Right. So I think that we saw the Shake Shack took some money. Ruth Chris's Steakhouse, I think, was one that really got a lot of heat for taking what they took in. And I want to also clear the air that, some of those folks that took money also returned it.
Right.
So let's give credit where credit is due. When they realized, oh, maybe not, like maybe this was not necessarily the intention. We also have to understand too that there are folks out there that are working for the businesses that are responsible for ensuring that if grants become available, they're applying for those grants for those companies. I don't think that there is a way for us to supersede the federal stimulus guidelines. I think that there is the ability for us, and I believe that we have seen it on numerous occasions when we talk about and emphasize the needs for small business supports. We've done it here. The feds have done it there. And I think that the one thing that we can really do is truly guilt folks. And I think that that's what happened with a couple of those bigger corporations. They were lambasted on social media about how dare you take this money when you net profited millions and millions of dollars last year. We as a society have the ability, if we stick together, to make great change. You've heard me preach it over and over and over again. So just like if you don't like a company because of what political affiliation that they have, if you don't like a company because of a direction that they took, get out there and talk about it. Talk about it in a respectful manner. Talk about it in a way where you have a solution to the problem or the situation. But together we can unite and make change. And I don't think that all of those changes necessarily have to be legislative fixes. But in this situation that specific, that becomes a federal conversation of which the states necessarily don't have that oversight.
Yeah, I agree that especially in light of the recent developments, that grassroots problem solving is going to be a trend. Because I think that some of these problems, as you very eloquently stated, require a cultural sea change as opposed to a legislative sea change. And sometimes those cultural movements are predicated on legislative change. So
absolutely,
we need to hear more from the people who are affected or impacted by these issues, so that it would give you and people in your position the framework in which to develop the language for legislation.
Well, and I think that it's also vitally important that when we talk about this, we have to be able to be mature enough to see both sides.
Right.
Without a biased opinion.
Right.
And I think that that's difficult for some of us to do. And that doesn't make us wrong. I just think that it is difficult for us. I was talking to the police chief today, for obvious, reasons, with all of the underlining things that are going on across our state and across our country. Things, by the way, that have been going on now for decades. This did not just start last week. This has been going on for generations.
Right.
And it's really about the understanding, the ability to ask questions. Don't believe everything that you hear. Don't believe everything that you read. Go to the source, ask the questions, get the answers. And then from there, let's work together. I will never understand what it is like to live in your skin. There's no possible way that that is possible. But I will do my darndest to try to understand it to the best of my ability. And I think that that's what we need to do. We need to put ourselves in other people's shoes and turn around and say, okay, now what? Now how did we get there? It's the conversation about tearing down all of the statutes and monuments and trying to, erase history. And, we've had this conversation in my own house around our dinner table with my millennial kids about, is that the right or the wrong thing to do? Do we tear down the statutes, or do we learn from those folks? And then do we try to learn from history and make sure we don't repeat it? And, I think that's got to be this conversation. History has made us who we are.
Right.
But history also needs to ensure that we do not continue to repeat history. The
Right.
whole point of it is to learn from it and to make things better. And I will tell you that going through school, I was never taught that Columbus was a bad guy. I was taught that Columbus was the guy that he is the reason why we're here. Nobody ever gave us the rest of the story. So I think that some of this also falls upon the way that we educate our kids and about giving them more credit than I think that we sometimes do, and not protecting them from what maybe some of the harsh realities are, but teaching them in a way that they can help change our future.
As we wind down this interview, Michelle, we did have an opportunity to speak with Police Chief Bill Baldwin, and I sincerely believe that he is the man for the job for our city at this particular time and what we're going through. And I think that amidst some of these issues, at least the residents of Torrington can be reassured that they have leadership in the police department that is working effortlessly to reduce tensions, to have more efficacy in terms of how they communicate and outreach to the community. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on Chief Baldwin and how he is attempting to deal with these issues that we're facing in our local community.
I think that you hit it on the head in regards, obviously Chief Baldwin is still new in the world of Torrington Police Department. He's been here just shy of 2 years. Obviously a lot has happened in those couple of years, and you walk into a department just like any other business. You've got the good and the bad. And so, you're trying to make it your department. You're trying to build your personnel and your morale. It is a job, that you need to have trust in your brethrens to make sure they have your back. God forbid something goes wrong, but at the same time, you also have to have the trust in the community that they are going to do the right thing. And with my conversation with him today, I find that he is actively engaged in trying to figure out what those needs are in our community. At the same time, running a department.
Right.
And I think that we have to be cautious about saying we're going to strip all of the money out of our police departments, or we're going to, do this or do that. I often say that once the horse has left the barn, it's a little too late. You're not going to get them back.
Right.
And we we need to ensure that the direction that we go is a sustainable direction,
Right.
and a proactive direction, but not a hastily direction. And we need to ensure that that keeping our community safe without biasness is on the forefront. And if there is a way that can benefit the department and the community by some changes, then I believe that the chief is open to hearing what those possible changes might be. But I also know that we have to be cautious about stripping departments. And we know that there are good departments. We know that there are good police officers. Just like with anything else, there are good and bad apples in the bunch. So we need to ensure that folks are comfortable walking out of their front door, that they don't believe that they're targeted, that they are treated equally with everybody else in their community. That is first and foremost on this. But we need to not strip our police department from being able to defend themselves and our community. God forbid something goes awry. So there is definitely a balancing act, and as Chief and I were talking about, it's really strike that balance that we can grow from. And how do we ensure that everybody is protected? And that means on both sides here, because nobody signed up. If you're a police officer, you did not sign up to be shot because you were a police officer. But at the same time, if you were somebody of color, you didn't sign up to be shot because you were somebody of color. Right. And so we need to bridge that gap. We need to fix the broken parts because it's been long enough. We need to not have a group of kids rally together last week and say, I'm going to go down just to anger the protesters. Right. That doesn't solve your problem. Right. We need to work together. We don't need to add fuel to the fire. Right. Well, Michelle, you make some great points. And I do believe that in order to get the type of community policing that we really need, we have to fund the police. Right. And I think one of the ways that we can, two of the suggestions that I would have would be, number one, to have community review boards where the community can look at some of the policies that the police department has and examine those to see if they are a hindrance to effective policing or if they're intimidating to the community. Well, Jacques, wait, before you go further, we do have an elected board of public safety. So not every community does, but we, as a voter, elect those folks to oversee our public safety units. And I'm not saying that that's the end all, but I'm saying that there is one layer in place to be able to do some of that. I'm not saying what you're suggesting is not also a viable option, but I don't want to miss out on the fact that we do have a governing board of public safety that is elected by the community members to oversee our departments. And I'm very well with that, but I do think that we need a second level of oversight. And that's what I'm saying. I'm not arguing that. I just wanted to throw that out there to add to your discussion. Yes. The other aspect that I do think will help is increasing police salaries. I mean, that I believe adds to the frustration sometimes that many police officers feel, because many times they're underappreciated by the community. And then at the end of the week or at the end of the 2 weeks, they don't have that paycheck that really shows the value that they have. And in our discussions yesterday with the chief, he says that's a constant battle with him. And if you were to defund the police, you're going to be taking away, more than likely, or reducing their livelihoods. And not to mention that traditionally a police department isn't fully staffed anyway. Well, I think that
maybe we should come up with a GoFundMe campaign.
Well, I think there's something else too, that if we're really talking about funding in police and making improvements, as Chief Baldwin and I were talking about earlier today, what else can we do while they're going through the academy to help educate them on community policing? How do we start before you become a police officer? How do we start recruiting at a younger age and having those conversations about this being a career that somebody would be interested in going into? I know that we have the Explorers here in Torrington, but how do we reach across the board to say, let's let you be, middle school, high school, fill in the blank. Let's let you be a part of the solution. And maybe then we would have that interest. And I know that there's also the issue about minority recruitment. Not only do we have a minority recruitment issue in schools, but we have it in our departments as well when we talk about public safety. How do we improve that? We can't feasibly lessen the requirements, because then we could putting people in harm's way. But how do we find that balance to ensure that we can make sure that we don't have all of those deficiencies when we talk about staffing and funding and et cetera?
Well, hopefully we can dredge up the answers to those questions on next week's interview.
Well, let's hope so. Then we would be having that crystal ball that would solve decades worth of problems.
Oh my goodness. Michelle, as always, it's a pleasure, and we so appreciate your time.
No, thank you so much. And I'm glad that we had a great productive
Absolutely.
conversation today.
Ladies and gentlemen, 65th State District Representative Michelle Cook, here on another episode of City Views. Stay tuned. We got more coming at you.
About that time.
City Views, City Views,
What's happening in your city?
City Views, City Views. City Views, City Views,
You got love for your city?
City Views, City Views. City Views. City Views, City Views, City